Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's conversation with Africa Development Promise. I have two guests with me. I have Amy, our technology coordinator, who is hiding here. And then I have Monica LaBiche Brown, who is joining us from Kampala, Uganda. Hi, Monica.
Hi, Rina. How are you?
It is very late in Uganda, and so we are deeply grateful for you for joining us at this time. I believe you have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation to share with us to tell us more about your project.
Yes, I do. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. And I am really pleased to be able to tell you about Africa Development Promise because it is a project that is very near and dear to my heart and something that is very closely tied to my history. I was born in the Seychelles Islands, and as a very young child, my family moved to Uganda, and we lived in the capital city of Kampala for about 15 years. However, I had the opportunity to be able to travel to some of the most remote places of Uganda because of the work that my father did. He was worked for a civil engineering company, and they built highways in Uganda. And he always believed that the poverty that was faced in the rural communities was going to be overcome by these roads that he was building. And in living in Uganda, like I said, I was aware of the difference between the city and the rural areas where there was no electricity, no water, and overall just poverty. Unfortunately, in 1975, my family had to move from Uganda because of the situation with Idi Amin. And my family moved to the United States as refugees. In coming to the United States, I became very aware of the excess that people had versus the lack in these developing countries, especially in Seychelles and Uganda, where I was from. And that is where I felt that I could make a difference. And quite frankly, my whole career has been focused on international development. I worked at the World Bank for about 15 years. I worked at Water for People for about 8, and started Africa Development Promise in 2014 with the idea that we were going to support rural women. And why rural women is because what I found was that 20 years after I had left Uganda, I returned to the country, and I found that nothing had changed in the rural communities compared to when I was there. And in looking at that, I realized also that the women were the ones that were being left behind. As men were taking jobs in the inner cities, the women were the anchors in the communities, women were the ones who were working the longest hours, and many of them were in the farming sector, in the agricultural sector, and they were not getting any support from the government because government and development practitioners assumed that farmers were men and always kind of talked to men about these, the things that they wanted to do in the communities, whereas women were the ones who were collecting the fuel wood, were fetching water, and they knew what the resources were in the communities, and they knew what the needs were, and yet they were being overlooked. So this is where Africa Development Promise we decided that Africa Development Promise would focus its efforts, resources. So what do? We work, our mission is to drive the collective action of entrepreneurial women to advance sustainable business and economic independence in East African communities. So we work both in Rwanda and Uganda. And the idea is that in working with collectives, they are more likely to be successful because in rural communities, a single individual owned business often fails. And it fails because they cannot take the risks on their own. But as a collective, they can then, the risk is on the collective and they can share resources together. So that is why we have gone with a collective model. I've already talked about why we do this. Women are the poorest of the poor, and they just work longer hours and have so many household responsibilities and have no time for productive endeavors. And so this is where we know that women who earn an income will spend 90% of it on their families. So if we want to address poverty, we should be encouraging and supporting women the most, because we know that they will spend it on their families. So how do we do this? In identifying a cooperative, we have a 4-part strategy. Each cooperative will be at a different place of development. So we want to make sure that as a cooperative that they are strong as far as their governance and their business management is concerned, that they have financial management skills, they have a business strategy. We want to make sure that where there are infrastructure needs, that in fact we can address those. So we have found that we've supported cooperatives with things like greenhouses, water systems, mushroom grow houses, things like that. And in fact, Dining for Women's grant that will be awarded to us supports the infrastructure needs and the technical solutions assistance for a cooperative in Uganda that is growing mushrooms. What we find is that these cooperatives may need any of this support, be it governance, infrastructure solutions, technical assistance, or network building. And through an assessment, we decide which ones we will focus on the most. For the mushroom cooperative, it is infrastructure and technical needs, technical assistance. But we also want to make sure that cooperatives are not at the mercy of the middleman, that they have a direct relationship with the buyer. And so we help them build their networks and the market linkages. By that, I mean that Africa Development Promise works with the local government. We work with businesses and other NGOs. We make sure that all our cooperatives are aware or linked to these partnerships so that they are not working in isolations and they can be better informed of what is going on within the sector that they are working in. So currently, Africa Development Promise supports 3 agricultural cooperatives in Uganda, 2 solar cooperatives, and 3 agricultural cooperatives in Rwanda. That is a total of about 300 total members and about 40 contract farmers for about, I would say at this stage, about 2,000 direct beneficiaries. So that is just a general overview of what Africa Development Promise does. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mm-hmm. So while I wait for you to come back, there you are. Monica, this is such a wonderful story that your father built the roads, which is helping you in Africa Development Promise to bring their products to the cities where it can get a much better price. Your story about these women entrepreneurs who clearly understand the needs of their community, clearly know what needs to be done, but they don't often have the time or the resources to get there. This is something Dining for Women clearly understands and seeks to support, is to give the entrepreneurial spirit the funding push it needs to get it done. So tell us more about these women and tell us more about these cooperatives. I understand the cooperative you're funding is very unique and very interesting.
Yes. And actually, Epaphroditus Women's Cooperative was the first cooperative we started working with in Uganda. And what we found with them was that these women already had an idea of what they wanted to do. They just needed some support to get going with their idea. And so they started out of a church. And in starting out of the church, they wanted to make sure that they had an income generating opportunity. And they decided that because there was a need for mushrooms in the cooperative, in the community, that they would grow mushrooms. So, in terms of history of the cooperative, they understood that there was a need for mushrooms. The government of Rwanda was pushing mushrooms as part of the diet for people who were affected by HIV or AIDS because they knew that the nutritional value of this. And in understanding that there was a need for it, they decided that they would grow it. And because it is something that can be grown at the household level and also something that requires very little space to grow. So initially they wanted to grow a few mushrooms to meet the needs of the cooperative community. But then they found that there was a market in Kampala and regionally. So that's where they started to think about how they can grow this business further. And they approached us. In assessing the cooperatives, we realized that they actually had a very good plan, but the mushroom garden that they grow the mushrooms out of was the thing that was eating up most of their profits. So what we did was have them trained on how to make them. So now they have the stream of income where they can grow make the gardens, sell those, they can grow the mushrooms, and they can either sell the mushrooms dry or fresh. Then they decided that this can be a bigger business. And so the next phase was to have an outgrower scheme. And by outgrowers, they were having contract farmers, people in the communities who would grow the mushrooms and they would buy them back. The cooperative would buy them back. So what the cooperative does is that the mushroom garden, which is the vehicle to grow the mushrooms, are sold to these contract farmers at a reduced rate. And then the cooperative buys back these mushrooms so that they have quite a significant amount of mushrooms. At this stage, they're looking at about 6,000 kilos of mushrooms a quarter, which can be either dried or sold fresh. So this is how these enterprising women have taken it up on their own to grow their business beyond what they initially started as growing mushrooms to support the community.
Absolutely. And I would imagine that these women farmers growing mushrooms is not the only thing they do so much else. You had also mentioned that these women made a decision on their own to allow their membership of the cooperative to pay for health insurance and school fees. So as we wrap up, as we're running out of time, can you wrap up and tell us, where do these women see themselves in 5 years?
Well, actually, they have a significant plan. What they're looking at next is that on the land that they have around the mushroom grow house, they want to grow soybeans. And in growing soybeans, they will then have a blend of flour that they plan to make, which will be a combination of the mushrooms and the soybeans, which will be a fortified flour that they can now sell to schools and to hospitals.
How wonderful. How wonderful. And this idea started with your father building the roads. Monica, this is a wonderful story. It is truly an Africa development promise. We wish you the very best for all success on this project. And we look forward to hearing about your women farmers.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. And thank you for Dining for Women for all the support that they're providing us.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.